2 Japanese prison of wars fought for him. The virgin black American soldier could only take one girl for sex. June 23, 1945. Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. The transport truck's engine coughed to silence as 2 Japanese women stepped down onto American soil for the first time. Oka Tanaka, 23 years old, former civilian nurse from Naha, gripped the truck's side rail so tightly her knuckles turned white. Beside her, Keiko Hara, 19, daughter of an Okinawan schoolteacher, kept her eyes fixed on the ground, refusing to look at the faces of her captors. They had been told what to expect. For months before the American invasion of Okinawa, the propaganda broadcasts had been clear. American soldiers were demons who showed no mercy. Black American soldiers were worse, animals who would rape and murder without hesitation. The women had been instructed to kill themselves rather than face capture. Oka had carried cyanide capsules sewn into the hem of her dress. Keiko had watched her mother take her own life with a grenade rather than surrender. But the capsules had dissolved in the rain during the 3 days Oka spent hiding in a cave, and Keiko had been too terrified to follow her mother's example when the American Marines found her cowering behind a shattered wall. The processing center at Camp McCoy had been built in just 4 months. It could house 3,000 prisoners of war, though currently it held fewer than 200. Most were military personnel captured during the final weeks of fighting. Oka and Keiko were among only 12 civilian women brought to the mainland for internment. The International Red Cross had insisted they be separated from male prisoners and given appropriate facilities. Private James Walker stood near the camp entrance, watching the new arrivals. At 20 years old, he was one of the youngest guards assigned to Camp McCoy. Born in Birmingham, Alabama, he had grown up in a world where white store owners refused to let his mother try on hats before purchasing them, where separate water fountains reminded him daily of his assigned place in society, where lynching photographs appeared in newspapers with the casualness of weather reports. He had joined the Army in 1943, hoping military service might earn him the respect his country refused to grant. Instead, he had been assigned to the all-black 550th Port Battalion, loading supplies in California, while white soldiers fought overseas. When the camp system expanded to handle the influx of Japanese prisoners, Walker volunteered for guard duty. Anything to feel useful in a war that seemed determined to keep him on the sidelines. The camp commander, Captain Thomas Harris, approached the 2 women with an interpreter. Harris was a West Point graduate who had requested this posting specifically. He believed the treatment of prisoners reflected the values nations fought for. If America truly stood for human dignity, he reasoned, then even enemies deserved humane treatment. The interpreter, a Nisei soldier named Henry Nakamura, spoke to the women in Japanese. His words were gentle, explaining they would be given medical examinations, clean clothes, and private quarters. They would not be harmed. They would receive 3 meals daily. They could write letters home once arrangements were made. Oka lifted her eyes for the first time since arriving. She saw Private Walker standing 20 feet away, his dark skin stark against his uniform. Her breath caught. Everything she had been taught, every warning she had received, crystallized in that moment of recognition. This was the enemy she had been told to fear most. Walker noticed her staring. He did what his mother had taught him to do when people stared in Birmingham. He smiled. Not broadly, not threateningly, just a small acknowledgement of shared humanity. Oka looked away immediately, her heart hammering. The smile had confused her more than hatred would have. That confusion would be the first crack in everything she believed. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. June 24th, 1945, 0700 hours. The mess hall at Camp McCoy served breakfast in shifts. The Japanese women ate separately from male prisoners in a small dining area that had been a storage room before their arrival. Oka and Keiko sat alone at a wooden table, staring at the food before them. White bread, still warm. Butter in small paper-wrapped squares. Scrambled eggs, more than either woman had seen in a single meal during the past year. Bacon, crispy and fragrant. Fresh milk in glass bottles, cold enough that condensation beaded on the outside. And coffee. Real coffee, not the burnt barley substitute they had endured in Japan. According to quartermaster records from Camp McCoy, each prisoner received approximately 3,200 calories daily. This exceeded the rations provided to Japanese civilians during the same period by more than 1,000 calories. In Okinawa, where Oka had worked as a nurse, civilians had been starving. Children's bellies had swollen with malnutrition. Elderly people had simply lain down and died when their bodies could no longer function on 200 grams of sweet potato daily. Keiko touched the bread with one finger, as if testing whether it was real. She had not eaten bread since before the war began. Her father's teaching salary had barely covered rice, much less wheat flour, which had become impossibly expensive. Private Walker entered the dining area carrying a tray. He had been assigned to morning guard duty for the women's section. He sat at a small desk near the door, far enough away to give them privacy, close enough to respond if needed. He opened his own breakfast, identical to what the women had received. This sameness would later be documented by Red Cross inspectors as unusual. In most nations' prison camps, captors ate better than captives. At Camp McCoy, regulations required prisoner rations to match guard rations exactly. Captain Harris had insisted on this policy, believing inequality bred resentment and rebellion. Walker noticed Keiko staring at his food. He met her eyes and gestured to his tray, then to hers, nodding to show they were the same. Keiko quickly looked down, but not before Walker saw the confusion in her expression. The women ate slowly, carefully. Oka tried the eggs first. They were cooked with salt and pepper, seasoned simply but well. She had not tasted pepper in 3 years. The flavor was so overwhelming she had to pause, closing her eyes against unexpected tears. When Walker finished his breakfast, he did something that violated no written regulation, but challenged every unspoken rule of military protocol. He approached their table, stopping 6 feet away, maintaining a respectful distance. He pulled a Hershey chocolate bar from his pocket, standard issue from the post exchange, and placed it on the table between them. Henry Nakamura, the interpreter, had been standing nearby. Walker gestured for him to translate. "Welcome to America," Walker said. The interpreter repeated the words in Japanese. Oka stared at the chocolate bar as if it were a weapon. In Japan, chocolate had become mythical. Children who had never tasted it knew it only from their parents' stories. The military had taken every gram of sugar for war production. Even wedding cakes had disappeared by 1943. Walker returned to his desk. He did not expect thanks. He did not expect anything. His mother had raised him to show kindness, not because it would be returned, but because choosing kindness was how you kept your own humanity when the world tried to take it from you. After Walker left for his break, Keiko reached for the chocolate. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. She broke off one square and placed it on her tongue. The sweetness was so intense she gasped. She broke off a second square and handed it to Oka. They sat in silence, the chocolate dissolving slowly, neither woman speaking the thought that terrified them both. If the enemy could be this kind. What did that make them? June 26, 1945, 1400 hours. The camp recreation yard was a simple square of grass surrounded by chain-link fence, 4 wooden benches, a volleyball net that hung unused, a small garden where prisoners could grow vegetables if they chose. Oka sat on a bench, a book open in her lap. The camp library, really just 3 shelves in the main building, contained mostly technical manuals and outdated magazines. But Captain Harris had requisitioned English language instruction books after learning several prisoners wanted to learn. Oka had been studying English at nursing school before the war. She had lost most of her vocabulary during the years of fighting, but the grammar remained, sleeping in her memory, waiting to be awakened. Private Walker was on yard duty, walking the perimeter slowly. He had learned that visible but not intrusive presence worked best. Prisoners who felt watched constantly became anxious. Prisoners who felt ignored became bold. The balance required attention. He noticed Oka struggling with a passage in her book. She kept mouthing words silently, her finger tracing the same line repeatedly. Walker recognized the book. It was a basic reader, the kind children used in American elementary schools. The page discussed farm animals, simple vocabulary, but for someone learning phonetically, English spelling was a nightmare of silent letters and irregular pronunciations. Walker approached slowly, stopping several feet away. He gestured to the book, then to himself, offering help. Oka's first instinct was to refuse. Accepting help from the enemy felt like betrayal. But curiosity overcame pride. She nodded. Walker sat on the bench's far end, maintaining distance. He pointed to the word she had been struggling with. Enough. He pronounced it clearly, breaking it into sounds. E-nuff. Not e-nauga, which was how the letters suggested it should sound. Oka repeated the word. Her accent was heavy, turning the final consonant into something softer, but Walker nodded encouragement. He pointed to the next difficult word. Through. He pronounced it. Through. They continued this way for 20 minutes, Walker patiently sounding out words, Oka carefully repeating them. He did not correct her pronunciation harshly. When she made mistakes, he simply repeated the correct sound, allowing her to adjust gradually. Keiko watched from across the yard. She had been sitting alone, pretending to ignore everyone, but watching Oka interact so easily with their black guard created a knot of conflicting emotions in her chest. Part of her wanted to join them. Part of her felt she should intervene, remind Oka that fraternizing with the enemy was shameful. But the propaganda voice in her head kept contradicting itself. How could someone who took time to teach pronunciation be a demon? How could someone who smiled gently while correcting mistakes be an animal? When the lesson ended, Oka bowed slightly, automatically. The gesture of thanks was so ingrained she did it before thinking. Walker bowed back, equally slight. He had learned the gesture from Henry Nakamura, who had explained that mutual respect in Japanese culture required acknowledgement. That evening, lying in her bunk, Oka wrote in a diary the Red Cross had provided. The entry, discovered decades later in archival research, read simply, "The black American soldier helped me with English today. His patience reminded me of my father teaching children. I do not understand how enemies can be kind." The cognitive dissonance had begun its work, fracturing certainty, allowing doubt to seep through the cracks. July 2nd, 1945, 2100 hours. The women's barracks at Camp McCoy consisted of 2 rooms with 4 bunks each. Currently, only 6 bunks were occupied. The women had been given privacy screens, thin fabric panels they could pull across their sleeping areas. Clean sheets were provided weekly. Hot showers were available daily, a luxury that still shocked women who had bathed in cold streams in Okinawa. Keiko could not sleep. She lay in her bunk, staring at the wooden ceiling, thinking about Private Walker. Over the past week, she had watched him interact with prisoners. He never raised his voice. He never touched anyone unnecessarily. When an elderly male prisoner had fallen ill, Walker had carried the man to the infirmary himself, rather than wait for the medical orderly. The propaganda had taught her that Black Americans were violent, that they harbored special hatred for Japanese people, that they could not control their impulses. But everything she observed contradicted these teachings. Walker moved with careful deliberation. He spoke softly. He seemed to anticipate needs before prisoners asked. Yesterday, Keiko had dropped her dinner tray. The metal plate had clattered across the floor, scattering food. She had frozen, expecting punishment. In the Japanese military camps she had seen during the war, such clumsiness would have earned a beating. Walker had simply helped her clean up. He had fetched a new tray from the kitchen. He had said nothing about the accident. When Keiko had started crying from embarrassment and confusion, Walker had handed her a clean handkerchief and walked away, giving her privacy to collect herself. That handkerchief lay folded under Keiko's pillow now. She had washed it carefully in the sink, dried it, pressed it flat. She knew she should return it, but holding it felt like holding proof that kindness existed where she had been taught only cruelty lived. Across the room, Oka lay awake as well. She was thinking about a conversation from that afternoon. Walker had been teaching her English again. She had asked him why he was kind to prisoners. The question had been direct, perhaps too direct, but her improving English had made her bold. Walker had been quiet for a long moment. Then he had told her about Birmingham, about colored and white signs, about his mother being called girl by white women young enough to be her daughters, about wanting to fight for his country while his country fought to keep him in his place. "I know what it's like," he had said quietly, "to be told you are less than human. So I choose not to do that to anyone else." The interpreter, Henry Nakamura, had translated carefully. Oka had understood both the words and what lay beneath them. Walker was not kind because he was naive. He was kind despite knowing cruelty intimately. This realization had shaken something loose in Oka's chest. For the first time since capture, she felt something beyond fear and confusion. She felt recognition. She saw in Walker's eyes the same wound she carried, the wound of being unwanted in the place you called home. In the morning, both women found excuses to be in the recreation yard during Walker's duty shift. Neither admitted to the other why they had come, but when Walker arrived, they both felt their hearts beat faster. The attraction was forming, unwanted and undeniable, growing in the space between propaganda and reality, between what they had been taught to believe and what they could no longer deny seeing. Walker noticed them both watching him. He felt the weight of their attention like summer heat. He knew he should maintain professional distance. Fraternization with prisoners was not explicitly forbidden, but it violated unspoken expectations. Yet he found himself watching them too, found himself wondering about their stories, found himself hoping his kindness might heal something the war had broken. The triangle was forming, though none of them had words yet for what was growing between them. July 7th, 1945, 1600 hours. The camp infirmary occupied the east corner of the compound. It contained 8 beds, basic medical supplies, and Dr. Margaret Foster, a civilian physician hired by the War Department specifically to treat female prisoners of war. Keiko lay in one of the beds, her face flushed with fever. She had collapsed during afternoon recreation, her body finally succumbing to an infection she had been hiding for days. Dr. Foster diagnosed pneumonia, likely contracted during the weeks Keiko had spent hiding in caves after the Battle of Okinawa. Private Walker had carried Keiko to the infirmary himself. When Dr. Foster had tried to dismiss him, he had quietly requested permission to stay. The doctor, recognizing genuine concern, had allowed it. Now Walker sat in a chair near the door, watching as Dr. Foster administered sulfa drugs, the same antibiotics that had revolutionized wartime medicine. The medications were given freely to prisoners, without hesitation, without rationing. According to medical records from Camp McCoy, prisoner health care received the same priority as care for American servicemen. Oka sat on the other side of Keiko's bed, holding her hand. She had been granted permission to stay overnight, sleeping in the infirmary's spare bed. The camp regulations allowed for such arrangements when prisoners showed medical need for companionship. Keiko drifted in and out of consciousness. During lucid moments, she gripped Oka's hand tightly, as if afraid of floating away completely. During fevered moments, she spoke in rapid Japanese, fragments of memories about her mother, about the caves, about the sound of American artillery that had seemed to crack the sky itself. Walker did not understand her words, but he understood fear. He had seen it in his mother's face when white men in trucks drove slowly past their house after dark. He understood what it meant to exist in a world where survival required constant vigilance. As evening turned to night, Dr. Foster left, sleep in her quarters. She trusted Walker to call if Keiko's condition changed. This trust, documented in her medical notes, was unusual. Many white medical professionals in 1945 would not have left a patient under a black soldier's supervision. But Dr. Foster had observed Walker for weeks. She had seen his gentleness, his reliability, his unshakable calm. Around midnight, Keiko's fever broke. She opened her eyes, clearer than they had been in hours. She saw Oka sleeping in the chair beside her bed. She saw Walker still sitting by the door, reading a book by flashlight to avoid waking anyone. "Why?" Keiko asked in English, her voice rough from coughing. "Why, kind?" Walker looked up. He set down his book and moved closer, still maintaining respectful distance. He thought carefully about his answer. "Because someone has to be," he said finally. "World has enough cruelty." Keiko's eyes filled with tears, not from physical pain, but from the weight of understanding something she had been taught never existed. That enemies could be human. That humanity could transcend uniforms and flags and propaganda. When Oka woke an hour later, she found Keiko sleeping peacefully and Walker back at his post by the door. Something in his expression had changed. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with lost sleep. He looked like a man carrying a burden he had not asked for, but would not put down. Oka walked to the door, standing beside his chair. She spoke in careful English. "Thank you. For Keiko. For kindness." Walker nodded. "You're welcome." There was a long silence. Then Oka spoke again, the words coming before she could stop them. "I think I understand now. Why you are kind. You choose to be, even when world says you should not be." Walker looked up at her. In the dim light, their eyes met. Something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, understanding. The beginning of something neither had expected, and both knew was dangerous. The first emotional crisis had arrived. Both women were falling for the same man, a man their culture had taught them to hate, a man who represented everything they had been told was evil. Yet he was the kindest person either had encountered in years of war and propaganda and fear. Walker felt it too, the pull toward both women, the desire to protect them, to heal something in them, to prove that kindness could exist even in the midst of humanity's darkest impulses. But he also knew that this path led toward complications none of them were prepared to face. The war was not over. They were prisoner and guard. And in 1945 America, a black man showing affection toward any woman, let alone enemy prisoners, could cost him everything. The transformation had begun, but its price remained to be calculated. July 10th, 1945, 1900 hours. The recreation yard had become a neutral territory where transformation happened in small increments. Oka sat on her usual bench, her English textbook open but ignored. Walker stood near the fence, watching storm clouds gather over the Wisconsin hills. Keiko had recovered from her pneumonia. She sat beside Oka now, the two women closer than they had been before the illness. Shared fear had created intimacy. But that intimacy was complicated by feelings neither woman wanted to acknowledge. Walker approached them slowly. He had brought something from the camp library, a world atlas from 1938, its pages yellowed, but its maps still accurate. He had noticed both women staring at the fence, beyond it, toward a horizon they could not see. He thought perhaps understanding where they were might ease the disorientation of captivity. He opened the atlas to a map of Wisconsin. He pointed to Camp McCoy's approximate location. Then he turned pages eastward, across the Atlantic, across Europe, across Asia, until he reached Japan. He showed them Okinawa, the island they had fled from. The distance between the 2 points was staggering. 7,000 miles, Walker said. Henry Nakamura translated. Oka stared at the map. She had known intellectually that America was far away, but seeing the distance rendered in ink and paper made it real. She was further from home than she had ever imagined traveling, further than most Japanese people traveled in entire lifetimes. Keiko touched the map gently, her finger tracing the Pacific Ocean. "So much water," she said in halting English. "So much between home and here." Walker nodded. He understood displacement. Not like theirs, perhaps, but he knew what it meant to be far from the place that shaped you. He had grown up in Birmingham and now stood in Wisconsin. He had wanted to fight in Europe or the Pacific, and instead guarded prisoners in the American heartland. Everyone in this war, he thought, was exiled from something. The conversation that followed would be documented in letters both women wrote months later, after they learned to express themselves more fully in English. Oka began talking about her work as a nurse in Naha. She described treating civilians during the American bombing campaigns. She did not speak with hatred. She spoke with exhaustion. "I saw children with burns," she said through Nakamura's translation. "I saw old people crushed by falling buildings. I saw soldiers who cried for their mothers. War does not care who suffers." Walker listened without interrupting. He had learned that listening was its own form of kindness, that bearing witness to someone's pain helped carry the weight of it. Keiko spoke next. She described her mother's death, the grenade, the belief that surrender meant something worse than death. She cried while speaking, tears falling onto the atlas, darkening the blue of the Pacific Ocean. Walker did not try to comfort her with words. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his handkerchief.
the same one he had given her before, which she had returned washed and pressed. He offered it again. After Keiko
Composed herself, Walker spoke about Birmingham, about his father, who had been beaten by police for walking on the wrong sidewalk, about his sister, who had been denied admission to a hospital when she was sick, forced to travel 20 miles to the colored hospital, about learning early that his country saw him as less than human. Nakamura translated carefully. The interpreter's own story, though he did not share it that evening, involved being sent to Manzanar internment camp with his family before volunteering for military service to prove his loyalty. The three of them sat in silence as the storm clouds moved closer. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Oka looked at Walker with new understanding. She had thought Americans were all alike, unified in their privilege and power. She had not understood that America contained hierarchies, that some Americans suffered under systems they did not create. "You choose kindness even when your country was not kind to you," Oka said slowly in English. "This is why you understand us." Walker considered this. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I just know that cruelty breeds cruelty. Someone has to break the cycle." The first raindrops began falling. The three of them hurried toward shelter. But something had shifted. They had moved beyond captor and captive. They had become three people sharing the weight of wounds the world had given them. That night, both women lay awake thinking about Walker's words, about cycles of cruelty, about choices to be kind despite having every reason to be otherwise. The propaganda that had shaped their understanding of the world was crumbling faster now, each conversation with Walker removing another brick from the wall of certainty they had built. July 14th, 1945. 0800 hours. The camp laundry was a concrete building that smelled of soap and steam. 8 industrial washing machines, donated by the War Department, cleaned the clothes and bedding of guards and prisoners alike. Camp McCoy regulations required prisoner clothing to be washed as frequently as guard uniforms, another policy Captain Harris had insisted upon. Oka and Keiko had volunteered for laundry duty. Work gave structure to empty days. It also provided opportunities to observe American abundance in ways that continued to shock them. The amount of hot water available seemed limitless. In Japan, hot water for laundry had become a luxury by 1943. Most families had resorted to cold water washing or simply wore dirty clothes until they fell apart. Private Walker was not assigned to laundry duty, but he had developed a habit of checking on work details during his breaks. He told himself it was professional diligence, but truthfully, he found himself drawn to wherever Oka and Keiko were. He arrived carrying a cardboard box. Inside were toiletries from the post exchange: toothpaste, soap, shampoo, hand cream. Items so ordinary to Americans they barely registered. Items that had vanished from Japanese stores years ago. Walker had purchased these items with his own money: 20 cents for the toothpaste, 15 cents for the soap, 10 cents for the hand cream. His monthly pay as a private was $50. He was spending 10% of his wages on gifts for enemy prisoners. He set the box on a table near where the women were folding laundry. He did not make a show of it. He simply nodded and began to leave. "Wait," Keiko said in English. "Why you give us things?" Walker paused. "Because you need them," he said simply. "But we are enemy," Keiko pressed. "You have no duty to give us extra things." Walker turned back to face them. He thought about how to explain something he barely understood himself, that seeing their gratitude for basic dignity made him want to provide more, that their transformation from frightened prisoners to women who could smile and ask questions made him feel like he was accomplishing something meaningful in a war that had mostly made him feel useless. "My mama always said you measure a society by how it treats people who can't fight back," Walker said. Nakamura, who had entered to translate, repeated the words in Japanese. "If we're fighting for freedom and dignity, then we have to show freedom and dignity, even to enemies. Especially to enemies." Oka picked up the hand cream. She opened it and smelled it. The scent was floral, artificial, utterly American. She looked at Walker with an expression he could not quite read, gratitude mixed with something deeper, something that made his chest feel tight. "In Japan, I was taught Americans have no culture," Oka said slowly. "No refinement, no understanding of beauty or kindness. Every day here, I see this teaching was wrong." Sergeant Bill Crawford entered the laundry room at that moment. He was a 40-year-old career soldier who had initially treated prisoners with barely concealed contempt. He had lost a brother at Pearl Harbor. He had spent 3 years believing every Japanese person was his enemy. But Crawford had been watching Walker's interactions with the prisoners for weeks. He had seen how Walker's kindness produced cooperation, where Crawford's harshness had produced only sullen compliance. He had seen prisoners smile at Walker while they flinched from Crawford. It had bothered Crawford at first. It had felt like weakness. But slowly, he had begun to question his own approach. When a prisoner dropped a mop bucket last week, Crawford's instinct had been to yell. Instead, remembering how Walker would respond, Crawford had helped clean up the spill without comment. The prisoner's shocked gratitude had shaken something loose in Crawford's certainty. Now, Crawford approached the table with the toiletries. He pulled a chocolate bar from his pocket and added it to Walker's box. He said nothing. He simply nodded at Walker and left. That small gesture would be mentioned in letters both Crawford and Walker wrote home. Crawford would tell his sister that maybe he had been carrying his brother's death as hate for too long. Walker would tell his mother that sometimes transformation happened in the smallest moments. Keiko divided the toiletries carefully, making sure each woman in the barracks would receive something. This fairness, this concern for others, even in scarcity, impressed Walker deeply. He had been taught by propaganda during training that Japanese people were selfish, cruel, incapable of compassion. Yet here was Keiko, who had almost nothing, ensuring others would benefit from his gift. That afternoon, during recreation time, Oka used the hand cream. Her hands had been cracked and dry from laundry work. The cream soothed them immediately. She caught Walker watching her and smiled. It was the first time she had smiled at him directly, without embarrassment or confusion. That smile hit Walker harder than he expected. He felt his face grow warm. He looked away quickly, pretending to watch something else, but he knew she had seen his reaction. The attraction was no longer deniable. It lived in these small moments, in gifts given and received, in smiles exchanged, in the careful way they found reasons to be near each other. The war had created this impossible situation, and somehow, in the midst of impossibility, something tender was growing. July 19th, 1945, 1400 hours. Captain Harris had called Walker to his office. The small room contained a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a window overlooking the camp. Harris was reading Walker's service record, his expression thoughtful. "Sit down, Private," Harris said. Walker sat, his posture correct, his face carefully neutral. He had learned early that when white officers called black soldiers to their offices, the news was rarely good.
Harris set down the file. He studied Walker for a long moment. "I've been watching you with the prisoners," he said finally. "The Japanese women, specifically." Walker's heart rate increased. He had been careful to maintain proper distance. He had never touched them inappropriately. He had never been alone with them without an interpreter present. But he knew that simply being kind could be interpreted as suspicious. "Your conduct has been exemplary," Harris continued. "The women respond to you better than to any other guard. They're learning English faster because you take time to teach them. They're more cooperative because you treat them with respect." Walker relaxed slightly, but remained wary. "Sir, I'm just following the Geneva Convention guidelines." Harris smiled. "The Geneva Convention doesn't require you to buy them toiletries with your own money. It doesn't require you to teach them English during your breaks. It doesn't require you to carry sick prisoners to the infirmary yourself." Walker said nothing. He did not know where this conversation was going. "I'm not reprimanding you," Harris said. "I'm commending you. You're demonstrating exactly what I hoped this camp would represent. That America can
Be better than its enemies. That we can win wars without becoming monsters." Harris pulled out a letter from his desk drawer. It was from the International Red Cross. They had inspected Camp McCoy 3 weeks earlier. Their report, Harris explained, had praised the facility specifically for the treatment of female prisoners. The Red Cross inspector had interviewed both Oka and Keiko. Both women had mentioned Walker by name as an example of American humanity. "You're changing minds," Harris said. "Those women will return to Japan someday. They'll tell people what America was really like. That's worth more than any propaganda campaign." After Walker left Harris's office, he walked to the perimeter fence. He needed to think. The captain's words had validated his approach, but they had also made him aware of the weight of representation. He was not just Private James Walker. To Oka and Keiko, he was America. To the Red Cross, he was proof that humane treatment was possible. To other guards like Crawford, he was a model for a different way. That pressure was exhausting. He had not asked to be anyone's example. He had simply tried to be kind because cruelty felt wrong. Now his kindness was being documented, reported, held up as policy success. Walker was still standing at the fence when Oka approached. She had been given permission to walk the perimeter for exercise. She stood beside him, maintaining respectful distance, both of them staring at the hills beyond the wire. "You seem troubled," Oka said in English. Her accent had improved dramatically over the past weeks. "Just thinking," Walker replied. "About what?" "About how nothing in this war is simple," Walker said. He spoke slowly so she could understand. "I wanted to fight, to prove black soldiers were brave. Instead, I guard prisoners. I wanted to hate the enemy. Instead, I teach English to Japanese women. Nothing is what I expected." Oka was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. "I expected to die in Okinawa. I expected American soldiers to hurt me. Instead, I am alive. I am learning. I am seeing that enemies can be kind. Nothing is what I expected either." They stood in silence. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the camp. In the distance, other prisoners played volleyball. Normal life continuing despite extraordinary circumstances. "Can I ask you something?" Oka said. "Why you become soldier if your country treats you badly?" Walker had been asked this before. Usually he gave a simple answer about duty and patriotism. But something about Oka's directness, her genuine curiosity rather than judgment, made him want to give a more honest response. "Because I hoped that serving might change things," he said. That if black soldiers fought bravely, died bravely, proved our worth, then maybe America would finally see us as equal. Maybe our children wouldn't have to use separate water fountains. "And do you still hope this?" Oka asked. Walker considered. "Some days," he said. "Other days I think nothing will change. But then I meet people like you and Keiko, and I remember that change happens person by person. Maybe I can't change all of America, but maybe I can change how 2 Japanese women think about Black Americans. That's something." Oka reached out tentatively and touched his arm. The gesture was brief, almost formal, but it carried weight. "I already changed," she said softly. "You showed me propaganda was lies. You showed me that kindness exists even in enemies, even in people my country taught me to despise." Walker felt the touch like electricity. He should have stepped back, should have maintained professional distance, but he did not move. "When I return to Japan," Oka continued, "I will tell everyone about you. About the Black American soldier who was kinder than any Japanese officer I met, who treated prisoners better than Japan treated its own citizens." "That might be dangerous," Walker said, speaking well of enemies. Oka smiled. "Then I will be brave. You taught me that, too." July 25th, 1945, 2000 hours. The women's barracks had become quieter as evening routines established themselves. The other 4 women were reading or writing letters. Oka and Keiko sat on their bunks, speaking in low voices. The conversation had started about something trivial. It had quickly escalated into something neither woman wanted to acknowledge, but could no longer avoid. "You watch him constantly," Oka said. "Your eyes follow him everywhere he goes." Keiko's face flushed. "You do the same thing. Do not pretend you do not feel what I feel." The admission hung between them. Both women had been avoiding this confrontation for weeks, but the attraction had grown too powerful to deny. Both loved the same man. Both knew this love was impossible, inappropriate, dangerous. But knowing something was impossible did not make the feelings disappear. "In Japanese culture," Oka said carefully, "we do not speak of such feelings so directly. But we are not in Japan anymore. We must be honest. I care for him. Deeply." Keiko's eyes filled with tears. "So do I. He saved my life. He treats me like I matter, like I am human, not just enemy prisoner. How can I not feel this way?" The conversation that followed would later be recorded in letters both women wrote to Walker after the war, letters that would be preserved in his family's possession and eventually donated to the National Archives. They spoke for 2 hours, their voices sometimes angry, sometimes sad, always honest. Oka described how Walker reminded her of her father, who had died before the war, a gentleman who taught children and believed in kindness even when the militarists took over Japan. She had not expected to find that gentleness in an American soldier. Finding it had broken something open inside her. Keiko described how Walker had given her hope that goodness still existed. After watching her mother die, after hiding in caves while shells exploded overhead, she had believed the world contained only cruelty. Walker proved her wrong. He showed her that even in war, even between enemies, compassion could survive. "We cannot both have him," Oka said finally, "even if he felt the same way, which he probably does not. Regulations forbid fraternization, and he must choose. We cannot force him to care for both of us equally." Keiko wiped her eyes. "Then we must tell him." "Let him decide. It is only fair." The next morning, both women requested a meeting with Private Walker. They used Henry Nakamura as intermediary, asking if Walker could spare time to speak with them privately. Nakamura, who had observed the growing attachment, understood immediately what was happening. He looked worried, but agreed to translate. They met in the recreation yard at 1000 hours. The morning sun was bright, but not yet oppressively hot. Other prisoners were at work details. The yard was empty except for Walker, Nakamura, and the two women. Walker could tell immediately that something was wrong. Both women looked nervous. Oka kept clasping and unclasping her hands. Keiko stared at the ground. "What's going on?" Walker asked. "Are you okay?" Oka spoke first. She had rehearsed her words carefully. Nakamura translated. "Private Walker, I must tell you something that may be inappropriate, but my heart requires honesty. I have developed feelings for you, deep feelings. You have shown me kindness when I expected only cruelty. You have treated me with respect when I expected only hatred. I care for you in a way that is not appropriate between guard and prisoner, but I cannot deny it any longer." Walker's eyes widened. Before he could respond, Keiko spoke. "I feel the same way," she said in English, her voice shaking. "You saved my life. You showed me that the world can be good. I know I should not feel this way. I know it is wrong. But my heart does not care about what is appropriate." Walker stood frozen. He had felt the attraction growing. He had tried to suppress it, to maintain professional distance. But hearing both women confess their feelings simultaneously was overwhelming. Nakamura cleared his throat. "Private Walker, they want to know if you feel anything similar, and if so, which one of them you would choose." The question hit Walker like a physical blow. Choose. Between two women who had suffered immensely. Two women who represented different aspects of what he valued. Oka's intellectual curiosity and emotional strength. Keiko's vulnerability and capacity for hope despite trauma. But beyond the individual qualities, the question itself revealed something terrible. He did feel something for both of them. He had been lying to himself, pretending his kindness was purely professional. But it had become personal weeks ago. Their gratitude had become affection. Their transformation had become intimacy. "I can't," Walker said finally. "This is wrong on so many levels. You're prisoners. I'm a guard. The regulations forbid this. My career would end. You could be punished." "But do you feel it, Oka?" Pressed. "Do you feel what we feel?" Walker closed his eyes. The truth demanded to be spoken. "Yes," he said quietly. "God help me, yes. Both of you. You're both remarkable. You've both changed how I see the world. But that doesn't mean we can act on these feelings." "Then choose," Keiko said. "If you must choose one, choose. We accept that you cannot have both of us." Walker shook his head. "I can't choose. Not like this. Not right now. This is too much." He turned and walked away, leaving both women standing in the recreation yard. Nakamura looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Walker spent the rest of that day in turmoil. The confession had forced him to confront what he had been avoiding, that his feelings had crossed professional boundaries, that he wanted something impossible with women he was supposed to simply guard. The choice would haunt him, but before he could make it, the war would intervene. August 2nd, 1945, 0300 hours. The alarm sirens shattered the night silence.
3 male Japanese prisoners of war had attempted to escape by cutting through the perimeter fence during a guard shift change. They had made it approximately 200 yards into the woods before being recaptured by patrol dogs and armed guards. By morning, the entire camp knew what had happened. Captain Harris had called an emergency assembly of all prisoners. They stood in formation in the central yard while Harris, flanked by armed guards, delivered a harsh statement through interpreters. Attempted escape was a serious violation. Those caught would face punishment according to military regulations. Private Walker stood with the other guards, watching 3 prisoners being led to the center of the yard. Their hands were bound. Their faces showed fear and defiance in equal measure. Walker recognized one of them, a former Imperial Army sergeant named Takeshi Yamamoto, who had always been polite during work details. Harris announced the punishment: 30 days in solitary confinement, reduced rations, hard labor upon release. The punishment followed official guidelines. It was not torture, but it was harsh enough to send a message. Then, something happened that was not in the official regulations. Sergeant Crawford stepped forward. He carried a wooden rod, the kind used for enforcing discipline in military prisons. Harris had not ordered this, but Crawford, who still carried anger over his brother's death, had decided additional punishment was warranted. Walker watched in horror as Crawford raised the rod. Harris should have stopped it, but Harris turned away. Perhaps he believed the prisoners needed a stronger deterrent. Perhaps he was simply too tired to fight his own sergeant. Either way, his inaction authorized what came next. Crawford struck the first prisoner across the shoulders. The man cried out, but did not fall. Crawford struck again. Walker felt his stomach turn. He looked at the assembled prisoners. Oka and Keiko stood with the other
Women, their faces pale with fear. Both were crying silently. This was the reality beneath the kindness. This was the power dynamic Walker had tried to pretend did not exist. No matter how gently he taught English, or how many toiletries he bought, the fundamental truth remained. He was captor. They were captive. And captors could hurt captives whenever authority decided mercy had limits. After the third strike, Walker stepped forward. "Stop," he said loudly. Crawford turned, surprised. Walker never challenged authority. Walker was the quiet one, the kind one, the one who followed orders without complaint. "This isn't right," Walker said. His voice shook but remained firm. "Geneva Convention prohibits corporal punishment of prisoners of war." Crawford's face reddened. "These men tried to escape. They need to learn. They're getting solitary confinement and hard labor," Walker said. "That's punishment enough. Beating them makes us no better than the enemy." The assembled prisoners watched in shock. Oka's hands covered her mouth. Keiko's tears flowed faster. Both had never seen an American soldier defy another American soldier on behalf of Japanese prisoners. Captain Harris stepped between Walker and Crawford. His expression was unreadable. "Stand down, Private Walker. Sergeant Crawford's actions are within his discretion as senior guard." "With respect, sir," Walker said, his military discipline warring with his moral conviction. "No, they're not. Article 3 of the Geneva Convention clearly states that prisoners shall be treated humanely. Beating bound prisoners is not humane treatment." The silence that followed stretched painfully. Every eye was on Harris. He could support Walker and undermine his sergeant, or he could support Crawford and prove that the camp's kindness had limits. Harris turned to Crawford. "Put down the rod, Sergeant. Private Walker is correct. We enforce discipline through proper channels, not through violence." Crawford's face showed fury, but he obeyed. He dropped the rod and walked away. The 3 prisoners were led to solitary confinement without further beating. The assembly was dismissed. But the damage was done. Walker's intervention had saved the prisoners from worse punishment, but it had also revealed the fragility of the protection he provided. He was one voice against a system that could become cruel whenever someone like Crawford gained the upper hand. Later that day, Oka and Keiko requested to speak with Walker. They met in the recreation yard, Nakamura translating. Both women looked at Walker differently now, not just with affection, but with something deeper. Respect earned through moral courage. "You risked everything for those men," Oka said. "You stood against your own sergeant. Why?" "Because it was wrong," Walker said simply. "Just because I have power doesn't mean I should use it to hurt people." Keiko stepped closer. "In that moment, when you stood up, I saw your true heart. Not just kindness, but courage. You choose right, even when it costs you." Walker shook his head. "It didn't cost me much. Harris backed me up. But you're right that it could have gone differently." The 3 of them stood in silence. The morning's events had changed something fundamental. The women's love for Walker had deepened into something more complex. They did not just love his gentleness. They loved his willingness to sacrifice position for principle. And Walker, seeing their faces, understanding what his stand had meant to them, felt the impossibility of his situation crystallize. He loved them both. For different reasons, in different ways, but equally deeply. He could not choose between them. Yet the world would force him to choose. The reckoning was coming. But first, history would intervene in ways none of them expected. August 6th, 1945, 1300 hours. The radio in Captain Harris's office crackled with news that would change everything. President Truman had authorized the use of a new weapon against Japan. A single bomb had destroyed the entire city of Hiroshima. Estimates suggested 70,000 dead in an instant. The weapon was called an atomic bomb. By evening, every prisoner in Camp McCoy knew. The news spread through whispered translations and horrified faces. Oka sat on her bunk, unable to process the numbers. 70,000. More people than lived in most Japanese cities. Gone in a flash of light. Keiko wept openly. Her grandmother lived in Hiroshima. She had no way of knowing if the old woman had survived. The uncertainty was its own kind of torture. Private Walker found them in the barracks that evening. He had requested permission to check on them. Captain Harris, understanding the magnitude of what had happened, had granted it. Walker brought no words of comfort. What could anyone say? He simply sat with them in their grief. His presence was the only kindness he could offer. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. But the world that emerged from the war's end was unrecognizable to everyone who had lived through it. The prisoners of war at Camp McCoy would eventually be repatriated, but the process would take months. Ships needed to be arranged, paperwork needed processing. In the meantime, life in the camp continued with a strange sense of unreality. The guards were no longer guarding enemies. They were simply watching people wait to go home. Walker knew he had to make his choice. The confession from Oka and Keiko weeks earlier still hung between them. The war's end meant they would soon leave. If he was going to act on his feelings, it had to be now.
He requested a private meeting with both women. They met in the recreation yard on August 20th, exactly 2 months since their arrival. Henry Nakamura translated. The interpreter looked uncomfortable, but remained professional. Walker had rehearsed his words for days, but when the moment came, all his
Preparation dissolved. He simply spoke from his heart. "I care about both of you deeply," he began. "You've changed how I see the world. You've made me believe that people can overcome hate and fear, that kindness can survive even war." He paused, gathering courage. "But I can't choose between you, not because I love you equally, though I do, but because choosing would mean treating one of you as less valuable than the other. You both deserve someone who chooses you first, not second, not as a compromise." Oka translated Walker's words for Keiko, ensuring she understood completely. Both women looked surprised. They had expected him to choose. His refusal to do so felt like rejection at first, but as his reasoning became clear, they understood the deeper respect it represented. "You're giving us freedom," Oka said slowly. "Freedom to find our own paths, not to be chosen, but to choose for ourselves." Walker nodded. "When you return to Japan, you'll rebuild your lives. You'll find purpose beyond what this war took from you. You don't need me for that. You never did." Keiko spoke in careful English. "But we will remember you always. You showed us that enemies can be human, that kindness is not weakness, that one person choosing compassion can change minds." The three of them sat together for the last time. They talked about what they hoped for after repatriation. Oka wanted to return to nursing to help rebuild a shattered nation. Keiko wanted to teach, to ensure the next generation learned truth instead of propaganda. Walker wanted to return to Birmingham and fight for civil rights. If he could show kindness to enemy prisoners, he reasoned, then he could fight for dignity in his own country. In October 1945, Oka and Keiko boarded a ship bound for Japan. Walker stood at the dock watching them leave. They waved until distance made them invisible. He never saw them again. But their story did not end there. In 1952, Oka wrote a letter that reached Walker through Red Cross channels. She had become a nurse in Tokyo. She had married a doctor who shared her belief in compassion over hatred. She thanked Walker for showing her that transformation was possible. Keiko's letter arrived in 1955. She taught English at a high school in Osaka. She told her students about the Black American soldier who had treated her with dignity when she was his enemy. Many of her students later became advocates for racial equality in Japan. Walker returned to Birmingham and joined the civil rights movement. When asked why he risked his life for equality, he spoke of 2 Japanese women who had taught him that changing one mind at a time was how you changed the world. The story of Private James Walker and the 2 prisoners of war became a testament to an essential truth: that mercy is stronger than hatred, that kindness can survive even the darkest circumstances, that people can choose compassion even when everything teaches them cruelty. 3 lives intersected in a prisoner of war camp in Wisconsin during summer 1945. None of them could have predicted how those months would shape everything that followed, but each carried forward the lesson they learned together: that humanity persists, that transformation is possible, that love, in its purest form, sometimes means letting go. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.